paradrama tales. She looked me in the eyes, drunk and defiant, and said, "If you don't want to be here, then go." So I did. I left the club at 3 a.m. and walked away. Now she says I abandoned her. But tell me, what do you do when someone tells you to leave and actually means it? It really did start perfectly. We were on vacation, just the two of us, in a country where the language was foreign but the energy was warm. I remember how the night air felt on my face, a little sticky from the ocean, but sweet. We were tipsy, laughing too loud, stumbling just enough to know we were in that golden space between sober and stupid, the kind of tipsy where everything feels like magic and the world spins in your favor. We walked along the shoreline with cheap drinks in hand, the kind you grab from a street vendor with no label and way too much sugar. She wore that loose white shirt she always travels with, the one that falls off one shoulder and makes her look effortlessly free. We talked about nothing and everything, childhood dreams, inside jokes, that couple walking in front of us who were clearly fighting in whispers. And then we sat, right by the ocean. It was one of those moments that feels like it should be captured in a movie. Two people sitting on a low concrete ledge, the waves crashing just far enough to be romantic, not dangerous. We kissed. We made each other laugh. I told her, if this was the end of the night, I'd be happy. And I meant it. Right then, that moment was whole. But it wasn't the end of the night. Some guy walking past us overheard our conversation about finding a place with good music. He leaned in and recommended a club a few blocks away, said it was loud, alive, the real local vibe. We looked at each other and shrugged, both a little drunk, both chasing that next good thing like it was a prize to be won. The drive there was short, quiet. She played something loud on her phone, held my hand over the gear shift, and danced a little in her seat. I remember looking at her and thinking how lucky I was to have someone who still got excited like that, like a kid going to a carnival. The club was busy, crowded, pulsing, full of people who didn't speak our language, but didn't need to. Music does that. It erases borders. But as soon as we stepped inside, I felt it. Something off. The lights were harsh, strobing. The bass hit harder than I was ready for. The air was tight with bodies, perfume, alcohol, and something else I couldn't quite name. Tension, maybe. A kind of pressure I couldn't shake. But she didn't notice. She was already moving, already smiling, already in the rhythm of it. And because I didn't want to break the spell, I smiled too. I tried to match her energy, tried to make myself small and relaxed in a space that made me feel anything but. And still, even then, I wasn't unhappy. I kept thinking, just hold on. You had a perfect evening. Don't ruin it now. Be the fun boyfriend. Be easy. Be light. Be less. So I did. I stayed. I danced, sort of. I nodded along. I let myself float in her joy, even as my chest tightened and the noise swallowed me. If I had known how the night would end, maybe I would have stopped us right there. Maybe I would have said, let's just go back. Let's end it with the ocean, not the noise. But I didn't. Because everything felt perfect. Until it didn't. The first thing that hit me wasn't the music. It was the light. Sharp, white, almost surgical. It flickered too fast and too often, cutting across the dark like knives. I blinked. My body tensed. I told myself it was temporary. I'd adjust. Everyone else seemed fine, laughing, dancing, spilling drinks, shouting over the beat like it was nothing. But for me, it wasn't nothing. It was already too much. I have this thing, social anxiety, mixed with light and sound sensitivity. It's not dramatic. I don't collapse in public or run screaming. I just shrink. My senses overload. My breathing shifts. I get quiet, hyper-aware. Every light feels like it's aimed at me. Every glance from a stranger feels like a judgment, even when I know, logically, they're not looking at me. But logic doesn't mean anything when your nervous system decides it's time to panic. And in that club, it decided. People were packed, shoulder to shoulder. The air was hot with sweat and perfume, thick like you could chew it. The floor pulsed. The speakers vibrated up through my shoes. I could feel the bass inside my chest, not as rhythm, but as threat. Like my body didn't understand this was music, not danger. She didn't notice. Of course she didn't. She was in her zone, eyes closed, arms above her head, swaying in the chaotic grace of someone who felt completely at home. I tried to stand behind her, hands on her hips, just anchoring myself to her energy. That helped for a while. Then the pushing started. First, it was subtle. A shoulder here, a drink splashed there. Then someone tapped me and gestured rudely, "Move." We shifted. Then it happened again, and again. Apparently, we were standing in some reserved area, and unless we paid $200 for a table, we weren't welcome. Fair enough, I offered to pay. I just wanted a corner, a place to breathe, a spot where I could hold her and not feel like I was drowning in neon. But she shook her head, laughed it off, said, "Come on, it's not that bad, let's just keep moving." I followed her deeper into the crowd. My chest was tightening now, not metaphorically, literally. I was swallowing air like it might run out. Every flash of light made me squint. Every bump against my back made me flinch. I felt like I was being pulled apart one nerve at a time. I leaned in, tried to tell her, "Hey, this is too much for me. Can we go?" She didn't hear. I said it again, louder. She turned, annoyed. "You're overreacting," she said. "It's in your head. Don't ruin this." And I know she didn't mean to be cruel. She was drunk, having fun, completely in a different reality than the one I was stuck in. But that sentence, it cut deeper than the lights or the music ever could. Because I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I was trying not to disappear. I looked around. There were people everywhere. None of them knew me. None of them cared. I was a foreigner, panicking in a place I didn't belong, trying to explain to the one person I loved that I was cracking open, and she couldn't see it. It wasn't even 4 a.m. yet. The club was still full, the music still pounding. And I was standing in the middle of all that noise, wondering how much more I could take before I simply broke. There's a strange kind of loneliness that creeps in when you're surrounded by people who are all having a good time. Except you. It's not the same as being alone. It's worse. Because the world keeps spinning, everyone keeps smiling, and you're stuck. Frozen. Drowning in a sea of joy you can't touch. That's exactly where I was. I tried to keep up. Really, I did. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I danced, or at least moved enough to look like I was part of the moment. I followed her from one side of the club to the other, weaving through the crowd like we were on a scavenger hunt for comfort we were never going to find. Every time we settled in a new spot, someone would come and nudge us out. First it was polite, just a tap and a look. Then it was less friendly. The message was clear: pay up or move along. I pulled out my card and offered. Not because I wanted a bottle, not because I wanted to act like someone I'm not, but because I wanted something solid beneath my feet, a place where I could hold her, talk to her, breathe. But she waved it off. "Why waste money?" she said, laughing, tipsy and carefree. "It's fine. Let's stay in the crowd. It's more fun." More fun, for her. I nodded. Because what else could I do? I didn't want to ruin her night. I didn't want to be the buzzkill boyfriend. I told myself, just a little longer. Just stay quiet. Let her have this. But every second I stayed, I felt myself folding inward. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just slowly disappearing from the version of myself I liked. The one that could protect her. The one that could speak up. I tried again to explain. I leaned in close and said, "Hey, I'm not doing okay. This is getting too much." She looked at me, irritated, confused, and said, "You always do this. It's just in your head." That's when something cracked. Because it wasn't just in my head. It was in my lungs, my throat, my fists clenched tight in my pockets. It was in my eyes darting around for exits. It was in the way I stood like a shield between her and a world that didn't even see me. She was dancing, laughing with strangers, letting the music swallow her whole. And I was right there next to her, sinking. I tried to reach out to take her hand. She pulled away. not with malice, not to hurt me, just because she didn't want to stop. And in that moment, I realized something. I was the only one uncomfortable, not just in the club, but in the relationship, in the compromise, in the silence after I asked for help and got told I was overreacting. That's the thing people don't tell you about love. It's not always mutual in the moment. One of you can be suffering while the other is soaring, and if the person who's soaring can't see the one who's sinking, well, eventually someone has to choose whether to hold on or let go. I didn't want to leave. Not then. Not yet. But for the first time that night, I realized I wasn't choosing anymore. I was enduring. It happened fast. No yelling. No tears. Just a few words tossed out between beats of music too loud to make space for meaning. We were standing near the edge of the dance floor. Well, she was dancing, spinning under the strobe lights with her head tilted back, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I was just standing behind her, trying to exist, trying to decide how much more I could take without falling apart in front of everyone. I leaned in one last time and said, not begged, not demanded, just said, "Can we go home? Please, I'm not okay." She turned, eyes glossy from the alcohol, and looked right at me like I was an interruption, not a person. Her smile dropped just slightly, and then she said it. "If you don't want to be here, then just go." 7 words. Casual, effortless, dismissive, like I was a jacket she didn't need anymore, like my discomfort was an inconvenience to be shrugged off. She turned back before I could respond. Back to the music, back to the strangers, back to the night that, for her, was still alive and electric. And I stood there, stunned, not because she said it, but because, deep down, I think I'd been waiting for her to. There's something painful about realizing you're not part of someone's night anymore. You're just extra weight, a shadow tugging at their sleeve while they try to dance. And when they finally give you permission to leave, it's not freedom, it's a confirmation that they were willing to lose you if it meant keeping the vibe going a little longer. I didn't answer her. I didn't storm off or make a scene. I just stepped back, slowly, like pulling my hand away from a flame. I looked at her once more, hoping maybe she'd turn around, maybe realize what she just said, maybe take it back. She didn't. She kept dancing. I stood by the wall for a minute. Then I walked outside. The air hit me like mercy, cool, open, real. I could breathe again, not deeply, not easily, but enough. I lit a cigarette with shaky hands, not because I wanted one, but because I needed something to do besides cry, and I looked back at the door. She hadn't followed. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't leave to punish her. I left because I had been asked to, told to. And when someone you love tells you to go, when they don't fight for you to stay, you listen, even if it breaks you. People talk about breakups like earthquakes, big, sudden, violent things, but sometimes they happen in whispers, in music, in words tossed out without thought. Just go. So I did. And I'm still wondering if I was wrong to listen. I didn't rush out. I stood there for a while, just outside the door, under a flickering street lamp, the night air clinging to my skin like a second shirt. The music still pounded from inside, muffled now like a heartbeat I'd walked away from. I kept glancing back, waiting for her silhouette to appear in the doorway. It didn't. So I waited. I pulled out another cigarette even though I barely smoke. It's funny how the worst nights bring back bad habits like old friends. A bouncer nearby noticed me, probably caught the look on my face. You know that look, the one a man wears when he's not sure whether to scream or collapse. He asked if I was okay. I said yeah, even though I wasn't. Then I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I asked him to keep an eye on her. I told him, "She's still inside. She's had a few. She's the one in the loose white shirt, dancing like she owns the place." He gave me a look, half understanding, half amused, but he nodded. "I'll watch her," he said. I thanked him more sincerely than I've thanked anyone in months. I stood out there another 10, maybe 15 minutes, still hoping, still checking that door like it owed me something. But she never came, not even once. And so I left, not in anger, not even in heartbreak. I left in disbelief, because for all the noise we'd made together in the past, every laugh, every argument, every whisper under the covers, I never imagined she'd let me go like that. So clean, so effortless. The cab ride back to the hotel was silent. The city rolled by in bright streaks, blurry through the fog of what just happened. I stared out the window and thought about how love sometimes dies not in betrayal, but in indifference, not in cheating, not in screaming, but in being told, just go, and then watching the door stay closed. Back at the hotel, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, staring at the wall, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My phone lit up with nothing. No text, no call, just silence, wide and loud. I messaged her anyway. "Hey, I'm home. If you need anything, call me." She didn't. And that silence, it hurt more than any fight we could have had, because it confirmed something I didn't want to admit. Maybe I was never part of her night. Maybe I was just there, a background character, someone to show up at sunset, but disappear before sunrise. At 5:30 a.m., she finally came back. But by then, something in me had already left. The door opened just after 5:30 a.m. I heard the soft click of the key, the slow shuffle of her shoes on the hotel carpet, and then the pause, that quiet moment when someone realizes they're walking into tension, even if it's invisible. I didn't move. I was already awake, sitting by the window, lights off, just watching the last traces of night slip into the horizon. She didn't say anything right away. She didn't have to. The smell of sweat, perfume, and vodka entered the room before she did. I turned my head slightly, enough to let her know I saw her, but not enough to offer more than that. And she sighed, loud, tired, like she had been the one left behind. Then came the tone. "You left me." Not a question, not even surprise. Just accusation. I didn't jump into defense. I didn't try to explain myself all over again. I just said, "You told me to go." She rolled her eyes, half drunk still, or maybe just angry. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." And there it was. That's the part no one tells you about emotional conversations. Sometimes we say things we don't mean, expecting the other person to read between the lines. But sometimes that other person is too tired to translate. Sometimes they take your words at face value because they've run out of energy to assume you meant something gentler. "I told you to go," she said again, "but you knew I didn't mean it." I stared at her. Not cold, not cruel, just honest. Number I didn't. She started pacing, frustration rising, slurring her sentences just slightly. "A group of people let me into their section. They were nice, they watched out for me. You should have stayed, or waited, or something." I nodded. "I did. I stood outside for 20 minutes. I asked the bouncer to watch over you. I messaged you." She blinked, like that part hadn't occurred to her. Like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't vanished the way she thought. But she didn't say thank you. She didn't say sorry. She just said, "I was drunk. You were supposed to know better." And maybe she was right. Maybe I was supposed to know better. Maybe I was supposed to read between the lines, decode her sarcasm, and ignore my own limits for the sake of keeping the night fun. But I didn't. I left because I had to. Because I knew if I stayed any longer, I would have either exploded or collapsed, and neither version of me deserved to show up in that club. She sat on the edge of the bed, finally quiet. We didn't touch. We didn't talk. We just sat, two people who had spent a night together, entirely apart. And all I could think was, we started this trip looking for connection, but somewhere between the beach and the club, the dancing and the silence, We lost it. And now the sun was coming up, shining light on the kind of distance no vacation could fix. I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. Was I wrong? Was I wrong to leave when she told me to? Was I wrong to take her words at face value instead of digging for what she might have really meant? Was I wrong to choose my own emotional safety over staying in a place that made me feel like I was coming apart? The truth is, I don't know. That's the thing about these moments. They don't come with a referee or a scoreboard. No one rings a bell when you cross a line, and no one hands you a medal for doing the right thing. You just live through it. And later, you sit in the quiet and try to stitch together meaning from the scraps. I've replayed every second of that night like a movie I'm editing over and over. Her smile on the beach, the music in the club, the shift in her tone, the moment she said, "Then just go," the way I looked back and hoped she'd follow, the empty space that answered me. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left because I was hurting, because no one was hearing me, because I was trying to say I'm not okay, and all I got back was, "Stop ruining the fun." There's this unspoken rule in some relationships, especially when one partner is louder, more social, more carefree, that the quieter one has to bend. That being low maintenance means absorbing discomfort without complaint, that if you're the calm one, the thoughtful one, the stronger one, you're expected to take the emotional punches and smile through them. But strength has limits, and mine was stretched to its edge that night. Maybe she didn't mean what she said. Maybe her words were soaked in alcohol and expectation. But in a relationship, what you say still matters, especially when the other person is hanging on by a thread. And I was. If I'd stayed, I don't know what version of myself would have made it to sunrise. Maybe the bitter one. Maybe the broken one. Maybe the man who eventually says something he can't take back. And that's not who I want to be. So I left. And I've been questioning that choice ever since. Because she's not completely wrong either. I was the sober one, the clear-headed one, the one who knew better. But does knowing better mean staying no matter what? Does being the responsible one mean you have to abandon your own emotional boundaries? There's no clear answer, only this. I loved her enough to follow her into a crowd that overwhelmed me. I loved her enough to try, to offer solutions, to wait outside and make sure someone was watching her. But I also had to love myself enough to leave when staying became a kind of slow erasure. And maybe, just maybe, both things can be true. Maybe I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't cruel. I didn't abandon her. I just finally chose not to abandon myself. And if that makes me the bad guy in her version of the story, then I guess that's a role I'll learn to live with. She kept saying I ruined the night. Even days later, after we'd calmed down, after the club was a memory instead of a wound, those words hung in the air like the stale scent of spilled alcohol. You ruined everything. But she never asked why I left. Not really. She asked what was wrong with me, why I couldn't just have fun, why I was always so serious. But she never sat down beside me, looked me in the eye, and asked, "What happened inside you that night?" And that's what she never understood. She never understood what it takes to hold yourself together in a place your mind is trying to escape from. She never saw the way my hands stayed clenched at my sides to keep from shaking, or how I stood between her and the pushing bodies like a wall no one asked for. She didn't hear the way my voice cracked when I said, "Please, I'm not okay." She only heard what I was taking away, not what I was desperately trying to protect. She didn't notice that I stayed far longer than I should have, that I tried to smile through the flashing lights that stabbed into my skull, that I offered to spend money I didn't want to spend, just to find a corner where I could breathe, that I waited outside even after she told me to go, still hoping she'd follow. And when she didn't, I still thought of her first. I gave the bouncer her description, asked him to keep an eye out, and texted her just in case. Because leaving wasn't a rejection. It was mercy. For both of us. She never understood that love, real love, sometimes looks like restraint. Sometimes it's not the guy who stays in the chaos, but the one who walks away before he says something unforgivable. The one who knows his limits and chooses silence over a scene. The one who gets blamed for ruining the night because he didn't want to ruin her image of it. She never saw that while she was dancing. I was drowning. And even when I disappeared, I never truly left her alone. I just stopped being visible. There's this thing people do when they've never had to scan a room for exits, when they've never had to rehearse their sentences before speaking, when they've never had to choose between panic and pretending. They assume comfort is universal. It isn't. What's fun for one person can be unbearable for another. But love is supposed to bridge that gap. Not by demanding sameness, but by listening when someone says, "I'm not okay." She never listened. Not that night, not afterward. Maybe one day, when she's with someone else, someone who also smiles too easily and dances longer than their shoes can handle, she'll remember me, not as the guy who ruined the night, but as the guy who held out his hand in the dark and left only when it wasn't taken. Because what she never understood is that I didn't want to leave. I just needed someone to stay with me, even for a moment. I've replayed that night more times than I care to admit, not because I want to change what happened, but because part of me still wishes she'd turned around. Just once. Looked for me in the crowd, reached for my hand, said, "Let's go, I hear you." But she didn't. And I walked away with a heavy heart, not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally started loving myself. We think of love as staying, as fighting, as holding on no matter how hard it gets. But sometimes, love is the quiet decision to step outside, to leave space, to let someone dance, even if it means dancing without you. I wasn't the villain that night, and she wasn't either. We were just two people with different thresholds for chaos, different ways of saying, "I'm scared," and maybe different ideas of what love should feel like at 3 a.m. in a foreign city. So if you've ever left a place, not in anger, not in rage, but in silent survival, I see you. If you've ever taken someone's words literally, only to be punished for listening too closely, I understand you. And if you've ever been told you ruined the moment simply because your soul asked for stillness, you're not alone. There are so many of us who walk away quietly, not because we don't care, but because we care too much. We feel too deeply. And when we're not heard, we fall apart in silence rather than explode out loud. If this story sat with you, even just a little, stay. Because there are more stories like this. Not the loud, dramatic ones, but the soft unravelings, the missed glances, the people who left before they broke, and the ones who stayed, but were never truly seen. Subscribe, watch another, or just breathe for a moment. You deserve that much. We all do.